Well, thank you everybody for coming tonight. My name is Dr. Russ Ramsay, and I'm with the reason I'm here, I'm co-director of Penn's Adult ADHD Treatment and Research Program. And I know this series has been specializing on children and adolescents with ADHD, but it's a pretty firm finding in developmental psychology that adulthood is a developmental outcome of children and childhood and adolescence. So. But one of the things, kidding aside, that we'll be focusing on today is that transition to adulthood and what goes on with that and what are some of the demands facing not only the high school student who's becoming a college student, an employee, or whatever else, or whatever other diverse roles the individual may have, but also how it impacts the family and the team behind the student. So that's why we're calling this Getting Ready for Takeoff, helping teens with ADHD succeed after high school, whatever that may be. So I like this. Adulthood ahead, please, please exit now, your parents. So the goals for today, because we're not talking, a lot of what I'm going to talk about will be apropos for any adolescent considering what happens next. But we're going to talk about exactly how ADHD makes the transition to young adult life even more challenging. Also review some of the steps of normative emerging adulthood. It's a phrase coined by the researcher, developmental psychologist J.J. Arnett to talk about this extended transition. It's not just 18 and it happens, at least for Western societies. It's like 18 to the late 20s. There's a lot that goes into this whole period of identity formation and becoming an adulthood in society. What are the changes for both caregivers and the students? Because it impacts the whole system. Review some of the steps that can be taken to help prepare for the adjustment to young adult roles, both by the caregivers and the students. And even apart from some of these changes, what are the nitty-gritty tactics? What needs to be done day to day to navigate this transition? How do we put it into play? Our cute little phrase when we're talking about coping strategies for adults with ADHD, everybody knows the strategies. Get a planner. I procrastinate too much. Okay, you should start earlier. We know that, but what are the tactics? How do we implement the strategy? So talking about how can families and the students actually implement what needs to be done to assume the role of young adult. My financial disclosure, just any other income I have other than my salary at Penn, and none of it is industry, all book royalties or honoraria. All right, but first off, what's the impact of ADHD? How does ADHD make it more difficult to navigate adult life? And one of the ways we're reconceptualizing, the field is reconceptualizing ADHD. So much is put on the A and the H. Well, how much attention is not enough? And how can there be an attention deficit if they can read the Hunger Games in one sitting all night? Overactivity, are we diagnosing childhood and adolescence? Those are features of ADHD. It would be akin to if we characterize autism as an eye gaze disorder. We take one silo of a facet of it and say, well, if that's not there, then it's not autism. And likewise, we're reconceptualizing ADHD as a developmental problem of self-regulation, self-control, problems organizing behavior across time towards a goal that the person wants, but it's delayed, and maybe there's a short-term cost. And that self-regulation is what's categorized as the executive functions. These semi-distinct skills, these behaviors that we do to ourselves to self-regulate. And this draws a lot on the work of Russ Barkley, Tom Brown. But again, organizing behavior across time towards a goal that you want. You have skin in the game, but for which there's not immediate enough payoff and maybe a short-term cost. And using that description of the executive functions and ADHD to a gentleman who went through an evaluation through our adult program and who had the diagnosis of ADHD, after hearing that, he slapped his knee and said, that's it. My boss always tells me if he needs it from me in 10 minutes, I give it to him in 5. If I have 2 weeks, it takes me a month. 10 minutes, the carrot's right at the end of the stick. It's visible. The clock is ticking. A month, it's just as important. I want to do well in the job, but I don't have to do it right now. or this weekend. I have next week, and I don't get till Wednesday. Well, I still have the rest of the week. It gets put off, put off, put off until it's unavoidable anymore. So even though the executive functions, when it's looked at in research, it can get boiled down into one factor. How efficiently do you do what you set out to do? How efficiently do you complete a task, pursue and obtain a goal? There are some semi-distinct skill areas. One, and probably the one we see endorsed the most, at least on self-report and observer report measures of the executive functions in adults at least, time management. And I say with time management, it's not just managing time, the passage of time, it's also managing the task, the effort, and the energy, pacing yourself. Having enough energy, being able to get enough done, but not so much where you're overwhelmed by it. And a lot of the tasks that we're talking about, and this is part of the transition to young adulthood, are those things that you can't just do in one sitting. You have to pick up and sit down, or they're never finished. Or at least they may be finished for the time, like grocery shopping or whatever the case may be, but you have to refresh them. You have to continue to do them, keep up with them. Disorganization and problem solving. Using the information that your fund of knowledge or information you have access to solve real world problems. How do you take what you know and the knowledge you have access to use that, hold on to it, and solve problems in real time? Impulse control. Being able to hold off on engaging in something that might be preferable to inhibit so that you can direct your attention towards another goal, another task. And in some ways, in Russ Barclays' model, behavioral inhibition is the first executive function to develop. The ability to pause and not respond to the environment. And in that pause, in that space, it buys time to consider how you want to act. Okay, if I go left, where is this going to take me? And if I go right, where is this going to take me? So to be able to act with intention towards long-range goals. Self-motivation, and some of the terms I will highlight just to give some added emphasis, because this is a big one for young adults. It's a big one for everybody. But motivation in executive function terms is the ability to generate an emotion about a task in the absence of an immediate consequence. The ability to make yourself feel like studying, feel enough like studying for the midterm 3 days before the test rather than the night before. Because the night before, there's motivation all over the place. It's panic. Oh my gosh, it's tomorrow. I haven't studied yet. Then emotional self-management, emotional regulation. You will not see emotions listed anywhere in the official diagnostic criteria for ADHD. But we know, and this is children, adolescents, and adults, emotional dysregulation. And we're not talking about a mood or an anxiety disorder, the same emotional frustrations anybody would encounter in day-to-day life. You're at work, you took your car in for an oil change, you get a call from the mechanic, you need a new transmission. There's going to be an emotional arousal for anybody saying that all of a sudden I'm looking at an $800 bill rather than a $40 bill. But individuals with ADHD are probably going to be more likely to get distracted by that, to say, you know what, I really can't work right now. I have to look up a car. Can I afford a new car? Or I have to check my bank statement now. Somebody without ADHD might be better able to go, I can't think about that now. Let me do work, go along, get through the day, and then get some perspective and deal with it. And it's not like a mood or anxiety disorder, but it might cost a couple of hours of efficiency, where later on the person goes, I don't know why I got so upset by that. So it's another distraction. It's like one of those internal distractions. And this is also one of the things that comes up more in adulthood relationships in terms of romantic partners, getting along with bosses, working in teams with others. That's one of the facets of young adulthood and independence we'll talk about later, is there's more interdependence. People are relying on your output and you're relying on theirs, so all of a sudden it's not just, okay, if I don't do my homework, I get a 0 and I can live with it. All of a sudden the team, the family, your partner may be relying on that. So again, this is Barclays' model of the executive functions. So just briefly, I talked about inhibition before. Nonverbal working memories, the ability, it's like the video replay in our head. Being able to imagine, if I follow plan A, where will that lead me? And if I follow plan B, how will that result? Rather than having to do trial and error with everything. and that's a working memory issue. There's also verbal working memory, how we use speech, internalized speech, to guide behavior, which ultimately, speech goes internal from the time an infant is babbling to learning to talk. And then later on in adulthood, that becomes our internal thoughts and self-talk. So I'm a cognitive behavioral therapist, and the cognitive is taking a look at how we think about things, how we interpret things. That's what allows me to have a job. That private self-directed speech, which guides behavior. I mentioned the affect or the emotional regulation, being able to generate emotion about a task. That's the essence of motivation. Then reconstitution comes from the developmental task of play. How we take things apart, put them together, play different roles. That's how we figure out how things work. And later on, that's the skill, that's the capacity for problem solving. How do we take all the information, synthesize it to solve a real world problem that maybe we've never faced before? Another model, very related to that, but Tom Brown's model of the executive functions, and again, very similar, looking at activation, getting started, being able to get engaged, going from off task to on task. Focus, being able to orient and sustain focus and shift when need be. Effort, pacing ourselves, regulating effort across time. Managing emotions, Brown was like early on talking about this. Paul Wender was probably the first. Memory, just that working memory, being able to hold on to and manipulate information. Then action, being able to control what you do, how you spend yourself. And just taking it down. And again, we're going to have some imaging and going on a little bit more about the geeky stuff, but this is providing the layer to understand, hey, my student with ADHD, why is this stuff harder for him or her? A lot of these things, a lot of the steps in the transition will be difficult for anybody, but this is what makes ADHD harder. So with the executive functions, another level of the motivation is adults with ADHD have been found to have less dopamine available in the reward centers of the brain. So the things that we rely on just for that sense of what do we like, what do we look forward to, and also that sense of reward we even get from doing stuff like finishing homework, the reward for studying for a test. And it may not be a reward like, oh, I really wish I had more school so I could do more studying, but that sense of satisfaction of, okay, I'm feeling prepared, that we might have to generate a little bit at the outset. That's going to be harder for individuals with ADHD to generate, at least internally or automatically. So there's less, from research by Nora Volkow, just less binding sites for dopamine in those regions of the brain. And also the level of dopamine in the brain does correlate with self-report questionnaires on motivation. So the fewer dopamine sites there are, the lower the self-ratings of motivation, completed by individuals with and without ADHD. And also looking at the amount of dopamine in the reward centers of the brain, the lower levels of dopamine, the higher the report of ADHD symptoms. So to see that really correlates pretty strongly. And so what does that mean in the real world? More trouble, what we'll commonly hear, harder time getting started on things, being sluggish about that, or resistant to it, oppositional. Easy boredom, trouble sustaining attention, getting started but then running out of steam. That sense of being lazy or not disciplined. I just can't make myself do what I need to do. I intellectually know it's important. I want to do well on the exam, or I want to do well for the boss, but I have a hard time making myself do it at any one moment. This is also why individuals with ADHD do better with salient, interesting tasks, things that they find naturally enjoyable. It's why somebody could play a video game for hours on end without blinking, but then it comes to taking out the recycling and all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can do this right now. But also more frequent rewards, that maybe not waiting, like with a student, wait until the end of the week to earn a reward for doing homework or arriving on time for class, but more frequent, like right after it happens, every night after it's completed. This also explains, the topic that, we need to focus on with this population, but nobody likes thinking about, the higher risk for developing addictive behaviors, the novelty seeking, looking for the dopamine rush, And this could result, this might be the reason we see more physical injuries and other health issues among adults with ADHD. One, the risk-taking and more likely to be doing extreme sports or things like that, the poor impulse, and also, with the longer range follow-through, just other health problems that might be avoided with follow-up health visits. That's an area of interest of mine. It's just the overall impact of ADHD on health factors. Chemical dependency, and also non-chemical addictions, addicted to the internet or gaming or gambling, whatever the case may be. Things that are more immediately compelling, but could be risky or at least will take time away from higher priority tasks. And I emphasize the executive functions and the dopamine in the reward regions of the brain, but there's a lot of overlapping models of ADHD. I'm not going to go through them all, but not viewing it as, well, which one wins, which one's the right one, they overlap a lot. And this is probably why we see such a variation in presentation on ADHD. Even within the executive functions, some might have stronger skills in some areas than others, and they unfold developmentally. So if you have more problems with some of the earlier ones, that might trickle down later on. So there's just a lot of explanations for why there is this thing ADHD and how it can show up. And we're still looking, people are still looking at and sorting through these things. The most important takeaway, though, is this helps understand the downstream day-to-day difficulties people have. And we value self-regulation. In a way, that is one of those markers of the transition to adulthood. It's being able to manage yourself, impulse control, taking care of the things, responsibilities that you need to take care of without being reminded. That's one of the assumptions, being able, of employers, college professors, romantic partners, families, being able to, without supervision, follow through on responsibilities, pay bills, whatever. So, that's sort of like the science piece. I just want to stop here and just see if anybody has any questions about that. Just, it's laying the foundation for, why is this so much harder for, young adults with ADHD? And all the data are the same for children or adolescents, but we're just focusing on this unique transition. I would say the transition to middle school is another big one, where there's another uptick in the expectations held for self-responsibility, accountability. The question was about if there's any research on the non-chemical addictions, computer. It's interesting. A lot of the research that I see published, and I think there's more coming out now. It seems to be coming out of Asia, Korea. So that there seems to be a lot more coming out there. And I think part of it is also, as parents, it's hard keeping up with, there's such new technologies and new apps, and it's an ever-emerging thing. But yeah, it's relatively new in the field of parenting. Well, how do we set limits on this? Because what's tricky about it, and this would be apropos for college students or young adults in the workplace, and what they'll say, I'm on my work computer, but I'm only a click away from shopping on Amazon or the ESPN website, and the student sitting down with the best intentions in the library of studying, and let me just check my email quick, and all of a sudden there's a text or whatever. So it's really tricky. I liken it, and not being glib about it, developing a healthy relationship with technology, it's sort of like dealing with an eating disorder. If somebody has an addiction to a substance, you can do a 28-day detox and just set up a surrounding where you just don't have that substance put into you. You can't do that for eating. You have to develop a healthy relationship with food and get enough nutrition in you. And likewise, I'm sure it would be physically possible to go 28 days without relying on technology, but we're so dependent on it these days, and getting schoolwork done and work done, the task becomes, how do we have a healthy relationship with it? So yeah, that's a huge issue, and I think we talk about it a little bit later. All right, so moving on to the, again, emerging adulthood. So in generic emerging adulthood, not just for ADHD, but what are the features? And again, this is sort of that 18 to the late 20s, 30-year-olds, at least in Western society, what characterizes this ongoing process? And it's the age of identity exploration. I think about how concentrated all the major life decisions are. We were talking before the talk started, or at least I was listening in, just even about the whole college application process. And there's so much put on, we got to make the right choice, and it's time bound. Well, we have to figure this out by the deadline. So, starting as a freshman at 18 or 17, well, there's a lot of big decisions that come 18 to 22. So these unfold over time, and yeah, they're front loaded. Where am I going to school? What's my major? And what am I going to do with that major? And relationships, all of a sudden, it's not just, yeah, we're going to the prom, but we're not thinking too much beyond that. And not that everybody's looking to get married right away at 18, but all of a sudden, in the 20s, there starts to become that discussion. All right, are we just dating, or is there more? The is there more, or where are we headed, is a more serious question. So there are many roles that people are trying on and exploring with, not small consequences. So work, school, and love, mainly. So it's the age of instability, too. It's not like this one-off transition, okay, now you're an adult. Legally, yeah, at 18, now you're legally responsible for yourself. But there's a lot of instability within that role of where do you live, what are you doing, can you support yourself? You're living independently on a college campus, but then you have to live at home after graduating from college because you don't have a job yet. Living with a romantic partner, then breaking up. There's a lot of back and forth until presumably in one's 30s, there starts to become a semblance of stability and maybe independent living. But again, not necessarily. And with financial things, somebody goes through a breakup, a divorce. There's a lot of boomeranging or rubber banding that can go back and forth. The age of self-focus, figuring things out. So you're out of the cattle chutes of school where you have to take history and we're going to study this. Now you have more selection in what you want to study, what classes you take, who you spend time with, who you live with. And over time, some of these choices in sorting through, they presumably will get more limited as you might settle down with a life partner. And even that may not be permanent, but at least at the outset it usually is. Jobs, having children, feeling in between. Being very responsible for yourself in one area, and maybe as an adult, okay, I have a job and I'm able to afford my own apartment, but not so much in another area. But relationships, I still don't have them figured out. Or somebody could join the military at a certain age and have all those incumbent responsibilities. But again, outside of that setting, there might be some areas where they're not as responsible on. And then the age of possibility, optimism reigns. There still seems to be open fields out there, and there still can be, and I think I'm hearing that at least the most recent generation, this list or this interview was in '06, so 10 years ago, but this is what I've heard every generation. I'm a Generation X kid, so we heard that we were the first generation where we didn't expect to do better than our parents, and I hear with the children, the adolescents in the economic downturn of the late 2000s, they're thinking they're not doing better. But there's still a lot of possibility. Like, what am I going to do? What role? Identity. Now, what are some of the other, getting down more to the nitty-gritty, what are some of the other normative demands of emerging adulthood? And again, that can be more difficult for somebody with ADHD. All the legal obligations of being an adult, the responsibility, the consequences, the new freedoms and limitations. It's sort of like when I was in training, as a psychologist in training, and started to see patients, I was not licensed to practice by myself. I had a clinical supervisor, and I could be going in to see my first patient, but I had all the professional obligations to maintain confidentiality as the most seasoned clinician on day one. It's not like, well, this is your first day. You can actually talk about if something's interesting. You can disclose. No, I had all the professional obligations and liabilities if I didn't play by the rules. And with that, there's also bureaucratic and administrative tasks, managing your finances, renewing your driver's license, registration. One of the things that will come up with adjusting to college is, the legality of being an 18-year-old and having confidential financial information. There are consent forms that have to be signed, so parents who may be paying for the education can know what the status is or what the bill is without waiting for their son or daughter to send it home. So there are certain things that get directed to the student, the young adult, for which they're viewed as being responsible for, even if that responsibility is, I have to pass this along to my parents. Commuting, driving, biking, walking, telecommuting, getting to where you have to be, showing up, class, work, whatever else it might be. You know, Woody Allen said 80% of success is just showing up, and there's some reality to that. So and with that, it's not just getting there, it's waking up in the morning. It's, you know, getting yourself out of bed without the help that the family might give. Now, this is where working in an adult ADHD program, when we started our program way back when, I was amazed by how many college students we had in the first year. I would venture to say, and this might be an underestimation, 60% of our initial referrals were college students, you know, having difficulties adjusting to college. And one of the most common things that we found was oversleeping, skipping the first class, having a hard time getting up and getting started. And when we'd get in there and maybe talk with the families, we would hear how, you know, getting the student out the door is like a family affair. Like the sister would come in and wake them awake when they didn't hear the alarm. Mom was getting the book bag ready. Dad would drive the student to school when they missed the bus. And, you know, the student would say, yeah, my attendance in high school wasn't bad. Yeah, I missed some days, I was late sometimes, but which is accurate, but it's the information behind the data. Well, how did you get up? And there's that underestimation of how much you rely on the scaffolding of the house you live in. Guess what? The toilet paper magically appears in the closet, and all that stuff that you may take for granted. And, you know, and not to say, boy, it makes young adults sound like dolts. No, but it's some of the things that until you take responsibility, before you live it, you may not realize all that goes into managing a household, or your own apartment. So it's all the stuff. And also with young adults, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on college, but there's a lot of other perfectly viable avenues that students take. Now, and different settings. So college, you're pretty much surrounded in a whole community of people within probably 2 or 3 years of your age. So you're dealing with very few non-college student adults. It's sort of like just this interesting little social setting. Now, if you're in the workplace, you're dealing with few, if any, current you're dealing only with non-college student adults, very few in-college adults, maybe an intern or something like that. But now you're dealing with like free-range adults. And everywhere else, bureaucracies, you know, the hassles of day-to-day life, dealing with going to the DMV or whatever. Again, free-range humans doing different jobs who they've got a very specific role with you. So it's just very different. And you have to wear a lot of different hats, and it takes a lot of different social skills. One of the other developmental demands, self-advocacy, which is particularly important for students with ADHD, asking for what you need, which sounds so simple, but this can be really threatening because I don't know what I'm asking for. What if they say no? Am I asking the right person? And it goes back to just also the automatic thought of I'm going to look stupid or I'm going to be embarrassed. And it's one of those emotional regulation pieces where then all of a sudden, you know what, I'll do it tomorrow. Yeah, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll go up to the professor after the next class. I'll go see my boss about, you know, the questions I have about my insurance form, whatever the case may be. So being able to follow through for yourself for things that are important. Self-care, managing health and well-being, including sexual health, being responsible for yourself. Birth control, just, you know, any, not just for birth control, but also protection against sexually transmitted diseases. Scheduling dental visits. You know, talk to a dentist about all the potential downstream health effects of not taking care of your teeth. It's not just, okay, yeah, I might get a cavity or whatever. No, it interacts with other systems. And it's like one of those things like, yeah, it's sort of out there. It must be due pretty soon. And it's like, no, you haven't been in for 2 years. So it's one of those other time and task management things over time. Accountability. And I gave a little different view on it because that's like one of those, it sounds so intimidating and almost like punitive. You must be accountable for yourself, and if you're not accountable. Now, there's a certain truth that there is a liability if you don't follow through on things. If you miss the deadline, if you miss the tax filing deadline, you will be contacted by the IRS. And they're not going to say, oh, well, you know, the 15th fell on a Saturday, and I know they usually move it if it's a Saturday. The 15th wasn't good for me this year. They don't care. And even maybe something not that extreme, but the little things, missing deadlines for, you know, open enrollment of insurance at your work, and you say, oh, I want to change this plan so I can save myself $300 a month, and you miss it, guess what? You got to wait a year. So there are some liabilities, but also the accountability of following through on things to completion, seeing things through. And with these things, be it at school, the workplace, a relationship, just managing your own apartment, living independently, there's usually skin in the game. We're not talking about this being willy-nilly or irresponsible. It's just, no, I want to pay my rent on time. I don't want my cable turned off. I intend to do this, but that's where, going back to the executive functions, losing track of time, underestimating, assuming that they will accept payment up until midnight if you make an online payment, or, you know, is the cutoff 6 p.m. All those little, seemingly small details that aren't checked out. And also that reliance on the last minute. And as I mentioned before, the interdependence. Others rely on your performance and you on theirs. So all of a sudden, there's collateral damage that can impact relationships. Your standing at work, standing within a group project in school. I forget if I said a romantic relationship, family members. So it's not just if you don't do homework or you don't do well in the test, it only affects your grades. It's, you know what, if you don't make that change in your insurance plan, then your child who has asthma may not be covered for the right medication this time around. And again, it's not intentional, and this isn't meant to be like the colossal guilt trip, but it's the big outcomes of the accumulations of small inefficiencies that can have big downstream consequences. But the encouraging thing about that, again, being a psychologist working with young adults, adults with ADHD, is there's a lot of pivot points to make changes, and that's what we'll talk about in the latter half of this. But these are all the areas we're dealing with. Getting ready for what's next. So there's a bunch of life skills, especially for ADHD, and either practicing some of these for the first time. Yeah, I've never had to do this on my own. Or adapting some things that may have worked, but now we have to adapt them to the young adult world. Or maybe something that worked in high school, well, I would get by on just listening in class, studying at the last minute, and writing the essay on the bus on the way to school or in the period before it was due. They're not going to be sustainable. They're not going to work in the next setting. Like I said, with ADHD, it's not a lack of knowledge. It's not a lack of information. So this is where, and this is especially apropos of younger children and younger adolescents with ADHD, Russ Barkley would say, less talking and more action. So don't explain. It's like a teacher going to the student who impulsively shouts out the answer in class, remember to raise your hand, remember to raise your hand. The student knows that. That's where ADHD is not an information problem. You give students a test, what are you supposed to do when you know the answer in class of a question a teacher asks? They will get 100% correct, raise your hand, wait to be called on. But it's the performance, it's the implementation problem. So that's where we talk about the implementation skills. How can we implement certain behaviors so that we can use the strategies to get the outcome, to pay the rent on time, things like that. One of the tasks, I'd imagine for the families here, is figuring out exactly what is next. So a lot of these skills we're talking about in broad terms, and it doesn't invalidate them, but how are they going to be implemented? Is this looking for a four-year college, a local community college? Is this going to be a gap year? Is this going to be an internship year? Is this going to be looking for a job and working to earn money for school? Or, hey, I'm not sure if I really need to do school. I want to do this other thing. Or maybe there's an apprenticeship, or maybe some sort of training academy for the exact skill that I want to do. So that's where we'll also talk about the goodness of fit. How can we research and find out what might be the best fit for the student? And also, what are some things that we can do to tailor the fit? But first, getting ready for what is next, preparing the caregivers for the journey. So the people sitting here and all the people invested. And I try to use caregivers writ large. This could be biological parents, blended families, grandparents. It could be a high school counselor who has an interest. That's sort of the team around the student. So for the caregivers, there's a shift in roles of being a parent of a young adult with ADHD. So whereas the previous role was more the authority, the teacher, the fixer, the protector, like the CEO of the child. In a way, the parents, the family is the executive functions. Like I said, that one family who woke up, it was a whole team waking up the kid every day for school. Everybody, in a way, actually it'd be a good video, a training video for what do the different executive functions do. The advocate, pretty much the prefrontal cortex. So it moves from being an engineer to more of like a shepherd. So the more emerging role is being more of an advisor, a mentor, a coach, guiding, sharing wisdom, directing to wisdom, passing on to other people who might be help. Hey, I can't help you with this. The fact that you missed the midterm, you have to go speak with the professor. I can't do it for you. The guiding. And the limitations of parenting a child who is a legal adult. So like the whole issue around confidentiality. Once they get to be 18, be it in treatment, medical treatment, financial things with school, there's legal confidentiality. Now, so even though there's that, it doesn't mean that you're hamstrung, but it's just another level to go through with your student. And getting the appropriate consent form signed. And again, it's another task that would be easy for the individual to put off because it doesn't seem important, even though the family would be stressing out, I would imagine, if the tuition payments due pretty soon. What are some of the other shifts to modified but similar roles? You'll always be the parent, but now you're a parent of a young adult child. So all of a sudden, it's an emerging difference there. So you're still most likely providing financial support, housing, if not in your house, maybe paying for funding an apartment or on-campus housing. And your young adult child can still be listed as a dependent on your tax returns. Providing emotional support. Now that's, again, one of these things that goes through different age ranges, but it'll be different in adulthood where all of a sudden there might be, failing an exam. If you're in high school and you fail one exam in physics in the course of a 9-month-long, 4 terms, you're probably not going to fail the class. But in college, you fail a midterm or whatnot, or you're having difficulties, all of a sudden then there may be some more stumbles, if not falls, along the way. And not being all or nothing about it, but it just might be different, where all of a sudden it's like, you know what, I fell behind and I can't catch up. And that's where listening in class, waiting till the last minute isn't working. I'm trying to do it harder and harder, but it's still not working. So that emotional support, end of relationships, things like that. Ultimately, a safety net, probably. If there is a collapse or whatever, a safe place to go back to. You'll still be the curator of developmental and educational information. I know in our Penn Adult ADHD program, when we do an evaluation, particularly of a young adult, a college student who maybe has a history of ADHD and they're coming to us for continuity of care, or they're not sure, they collapsed the first year of college, and that's like one of the questions, could this have been undiagnosed ADHD? Very often we find it helpful to have the family come in, or at least one representative of the family, because sometimes we'll hear, well, no, I did no problems in grade school. Then all of a sudden the parent will step in and say, your teachers had us called in every other week, or we had to help you with your worksheets at the outset, or we had to spend a lot of time sitting with you to make sure it worked out, or your father sat with you and really helped you memorize the multiplication tables. It's just that fog of the memory. So more accurate information that can be important for the ADHD diagnosis in the first place. So you're always going to be the holder of that information and the provider of it. but you're going to be less privy to unfolding new health issues. What the person, when they get sick, or what they might be going in for treatment for, or whatnot. And that's something that the student, him or herself, may have to assume more, or find out how to track, or maybe take on some of the medical history, so when they provide it for themselves, it's more accurate. There's also shifts in attitudes or thinking styles for the caregivers. And again, this goes back to my interest being a cognitive behavioral therapist. Some of the automatic thoughts, the distorted thoughts that we can have about people, situations. One of them that can happen with the young adult student is unfair comparisons. So making decision about, should we let this student drive somewhere, or get an off-campus apartment. It's really easy to fall into, well, this is the same kid who once did this. Some maybe colossally immature or not well thought out situation, and bring that into the current moment to say, we're really going to let this kid do that. But that's going to be practically anybody you can think of. You're going to look back at 14 and compare them with 18. And part of that's just, the normative development of the parents getting used to, we've seen it at all these iterations, and now, they're legally an adult, and they are facing some of these things like living on their own, getting an off-campus apartment. And also I don't remember having to whatever when I was his or her age. But again, things have, and again, not engaging in all or nothing thinking. It's not that these things aren't considered, because, this is the same kid who once did whatever and is still doing that. That's different information than the lingering anxieties that, hey, could that 14-year-old jump out here again? And it is possible. It could happen. But not letting that overwhelm reviewing the options. Allowing for a learning curve. Young adults will make mistakes. It is a bit trial and error. We don't want to rely on that 100%. There are some things where there's enough information out there in preparation, like safe sex, where we don't want to do trial and error if we don't have to. But there's going to be other things like, hey, I thought this is going to be my major, now I don't think it is, so I might have to take more classes, and I might need an extra semester to graduate, or things like that. Don't ignore the mistakes or the learning curve or the inefficiencies, but don't awfulize and necessarily overgeneralize to the future. That, okay, now my kid's going to be in college for 10 years and not going to graduate with anything. Is that statistically possible? Yes. I'm sure there are stories, and sometimes that might be due to a health issue or whatever. But not jumping to that conclusion and looking at the situation at hand. I was talking before this started, one of the reframes there is Department of Education statistics on on-time graduation, 5 years is on-time graduation. So the notion of a 4-year college is an oxymoron anymore. Offer advice, information, guidance, support, your presence. Hey, I'll go with you while you do this. And even scripts. Here's how you do it. Here's what you say. But let the student do it. And we'll talk more later about what are some specific tasks that the student can be given to practice being an adult, taking on some of the things that you may or other parents may have done for them up till now. Communication. This is a hard one, because the young adult's probably going to feel embarrassed, shy about some of these things, and not want to talk about what they don't know about. It's a big jump for the young adults, and we'll talk about that in the next section, because they're going from, hey, end of high school, having it all figured out, into, now I'm going to college, or I've got to get a real job, not one that's going to end at the end of the summer, and those are real jobs too, but it's sort of like, yeah, I'm going to be doing this. The thing, and this sounds more pessimistic than I am, but working with a lot of adults with ADHD is say, one of the things about adulthood, there's no end of the school year. There's no point where you go, okay, just hold on for finals, then I'm done, I get 2 weeks off, then I start over with a fresh slate. It's like, you got to show up every day. You got to work, and produce every day, and be it as a parent, a partner, whatever the role may be. So when you're talking about decisions to be made, concerns, sharing information, are you speaking in a way that will be heard? The words chosen, the tone of voice, the nonverbals, and also plan ahead for sensitive discussions. That allows everybody to get in the right mode. And that's a good, be it for a workplace relationship or discussion with a romantic partner, a spouse, because it's easy sometimes, like working with some marriage partners, one person's the morning person, the other person's the late person. So the one person who's the morning person wakes up and is ready to talk, and the other person's just waking up and says, I can't do this. And then they switch roles later in the day where the night person says, okay, let's talk about that thing before, or how we're going to pay for this thing. And then the person who's the morning person is dead tired. It's finding a mutually agreeable time where you can sit down, everybody, including the young adult, be in relationship mode, to increase the likelihood that the communication will be more constructive. Also, a shift in attitude for caregivers. And this is like a truism for adult life. I mean, it's going to be for the young adults too. Tolerating uncertainty and discomfort. How do we know how our child's going to do in college or at this first job or whatever? You don't. The student doesn't know. It takes time to gather the data. High school, it's like one of those transitions. Kindergarten, are they going to have friends? Are they going to make it? What's the teacher going to think? Middle school, how are they going to handle this? Peer pressure. Going on to high school, okay, yeah, it's like middle school plus, but there's a lot going on. How are they going to do? Getting ready for college. This is the next big one, going away to college. And we usually, grade school to middle school to high school, those are jumps, but it's in the same ballpark. Going away to college is a little different. Going away to the workplace, that might be a bigger, different jump in a way. And they're, at least to some degree, out of the nest. So it's like we won't see it. And in some ways that might be good, because if you saw everything going on, even though hopefully it turns out with a good outcome, it's sort of like, hey, they got a good GPA, they're handling college, and you don't want to see them like playing World of Warcraft all night one night or something like that. But it's also the discomfort, like, just waiting for the phone call, whatever. So it's getting used to that new role of not being privy to everything, not checking in, not getting to see them day in and day out. So again, being mindful of negative fortune telling or all or nothing reactions. Oh, here comes the big problem or whatever. It may be a problem, but keeping a molehill a molehill. Set out clear and realistic limitations or expectations relevant to any future plans that might impact the family. What is the expectation for paying for college? Is it that the family will fund it, which is fine, or is it that, if you want us to fund it, it has to be from this pool of schools. They've got to be state schools where we get in-state funding, and maybe even having an agreement, a contract. And I'm not talking about it necessarily being a legally binding where you bring in an attorney, but just to say, well, you guys never said that. No, we have it here, just to make sure everybody's agreeing, everybody heard what was said. And it looks like there's a comment, so we'll be at a transition point soon for questions and comments. In working with the young adult, and this could be in the communication, dealings with you, where you might get the blow off, you might get the stonewall. I don't want to talk about this now, we'll talk about it later. I know it's important, but I'm busy. Start with the assumption that the student is apprehensive, in the absence of any other information, apprehensive, embarrassed about doing something, about talking about the task, having to face it, and is reacting defensively as a consequence. They're sort of worried about, well, talking about housing, because that makes me think about a roommate at college, and will I make friends? And there's probably a whole lot going on in there that you're thinking about. You want to have a bed, you want to have a room assignment, and some colleges run out of housing, so we want to get this done on time. There might be a whole lot else going on under the surface for the college student. And again, not making excuses about it, because the end result is the same. The housing office will say, well, it's first come, first serve. These students got their form submitted first. You are on the waiting list right now. Well, you don't understand. We were dealing with a lot of emotional stuff. Well, yes, we understand that, but we take them in the order that there are real world consequences. So not ignoring that, but it's a way you can empathize with and hopefully direct to a constructive discussion. And the reality is there may be choices made by your student or a process the student goes through that is out of your control, that they may have to sort out, deal with consequences, and not to be all or nothing. You might be able to be supportive, give guidance, give help, but that's sort of like that essential tension that the family goes through. It's not just, it's bi-directional. I mean, when I'm talking with parents about this, I talk about the essential tension. You're getting used to this. And when I'm talking to the students about it, I'm saying, you know what, your family's getting used to you being a young adult at the same time you're getting used to doing this. And you have all the responsibilities of an adult, and the consequences are real. So, yeah, everybody's on edge a bit. So again, even focusing on the communication a little bit more. These will sound trite, but count to 10. Let some time pass, or think before you act. I like this by the old UCLA basketball coach: be quick but don't hurry. Yeah, be timely, but it doesn't have to be maybe taken care of at that moment. And don't just do something, sit there. Okay, we're not going to get the forms done tonight, so we don't want to push this too hard, but we do want to catch, one of us will catch our son or daughter tomorrow to say, all right, when's a good time this week for us to sit down for an hour and hash out what we're doing about housing or whatever the topic might be, to sort of lock it down. Prepare for the discussion. On your own or with your co-parent, anticipate what to say and how to say it. Knowing what are some of the buzz phrases or the terms that might trigger an argument. And we're not talking about walking on eggshells here, but also knowing here's an avenue we don't want to go down because that'll just erupt the whole thing. Just want to increase the likelihood of being heard, saying things in the simplest, most direct form. Anticipate reactions, try to normalize them. Yes, this is, we imagine as stressful as this is for us, it's just as stressful for you. Use examples of our concern is, we heard last year a lot of students at the school you went to got shut out of housing. We just don't want that for you right now. And sometimes no one of these things is going to be the light bulb moment that makes them go, oh, okay, now I'm ready to discuss this. But it does take it outside the room to say, this is not just us. There are other people going through this too. And I just found this interesting on a book on the adolescent brain, which is in the reference section. We usually spend less than 2 minutes preparing for one-on-one meetings. And that includes at work, with supervisees, important things like that. We just go in and fly by the seat of our pants, where in some roles that might be okay because we're just well rehearsed in those roles, maybe as a supervisor. But with parenting, and especially going through this transition, both the parents and the children, we might need a little more prep time for these important meetings. And again, set up a specific time and location to sit down with the student to avoid the ambush or the drive-by conversation. It's like, hey, we need to talk about, yes, fine, I'm heading out, or feeling like you're getting them right when they wake up, or they get you right when you're trying to go to sleep. Allowing everybody to get into communication mode. I'm going to use this as a break point just to check in on, because this is where we're going to talk about some of the tactics to help the students do adulthood, and later on we'll go through even more when talking about the transition for the young adults. But I just want to check in. Any questions, comments, yes, but statements? Yeah, that sounds good, but here's what happens in the real world in our house. And again, just this general transition to young adulthood, how it affects the family, and just trying to get on the same page in handling things. And you know what? Again, it's going to be one of these things that I remember when the author put in the I think her first name, and forgive me if I'm wrong, Frances Jensen, who wrote the book The Adolescent Brain, and talked about the 2 minutes preparing for one-on-one meetings. That she said the whole thing about count to 10, it sounds so basic, but it helps, taking that pause. And the sort of natural consequences. Here are the facts. Here's the deadline by which the form has to be in. Here's what we need to do to fill out the form. Here's what we need from you that we can't do on our own, like the preferences, or I don't know how they do it these days. And it's just, giving some reminders. And if it's the natural consequences of okay, we might be on the wait list. And now I'm not saying that, okay, we're going to mention this once on Monday and the deadline's on Friday, that, that they may come more frequently later on. The clock's ticking. And you know what, then you won't get a choice of a roommate, or you may not get as good of a room. The goal being that, even when you're not there and not saying it, now again, working memory problems, it's gone, but that there's enough repetition, or hopefully it's salient enough. Unless the student is really ambivalent about, I really don't want to go to the school, or I'm really afraid of school and I'm not ready, something else underneath it. But the sort of natural consequences, okay, if there's a hit, that's another reminder for, and not the we told you so, but it's like, okay, what do we do now? What are our options? And it might be, okay, these are the limitations. So I know it's imperfect because we could probably talk about a bunch of different scenarios, but it's sort of, I think the other thing is giving examples outside the family of, a friend of ours did this, or I read a story about how students, they waited too long thinking, well, I'll get on the waiting list, or 5 years ago, everybody on the waiting list got something, but nowadays, there's just not enough room on campus. I don't know the real scenarios, but it's, hey, it's not just us. And you can use the analogy, hey, this is like getting tickets to your favorite band. If you're not online the first hour, you're not going to get, it's going to be sold out, and you just don't get in. And the oppositional student will say, oh, I'll go to a scalper. Well, it's okay, but they're not scalping rooms at a local university, which is actually would be an interesting industry. The benefit with, and so the question was about how even though the person may be 18 and natural consequences, there's still a lot that falls on the family in terms of financial and whatnot. And I think this is where, with some of these transitions, a benefit is that there's also some peer pressure, that there are other people going through the same thing and talking about signing up for housing or whatnot. So that's something else that can be drawn on. So yeah, I'm not trying to be willy-nilly about it just to say let them go off campus or get a tent or something like that. But it's where I think the real-world examples of what can happen, there are some clearer, let's put it this way, anybody could always ignore and oppose anything. And to say, no, I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to do it, and then things are late. So ultimately, will the parents eventually maybe fill out the housing form and say, well, we think this would be the type of roommate they would like, and submit it? Yeah. But, I think with the, I think the using the real world examples of, here's stories about what has happened to people who haven't handed it in on time. And it may be, the oppositionality at first, but usually, or hopefully, there would be by the deadline at least, maybe later than the parents would like to have it done, but usually by the deadline. If the student's invested in, and working with the therapist, and again, that's part of having treatment at the same time, one of my things is, talking about, well, let's talk through, what are your goals here? What I want to get away to college, I want to live on my own. All right, are you doing what needs to be done to do that, where it can support, and it's not like colluding with the family, it's just, you tell me, do you want to live on campus or do you want to live at home and commute to campus? And so there, I'm sure we could always come up with some scenario where you go, well, that's not going to work, that's not going to work. But we're talking about like things that can increase the percentage, the likelihood of follow through, that might speak more to that modified young adult to adult relationship. So I think just the real world, here are the concerns. And I think that's like one of the areas with many of their peers going through the same thing. There is a little bit more of hearing other students, well, I applied for a job earlier, or I'm taking steps now, or I'm applying for housing or choosing my roommate ahead of time. I just want to make sure. That might also nudge them along. I know it's not a perfect answer. It's I know as a clinician, it's always getting in there with the specifics. All right, so helping your student with ADHD in terms of doing tasks, doing adulthood. So whatever it is, be specific about the task at hand. What we need to do is fill out the housing form on the website, or whatever the case may be. Make it something doable. Ask the student, do you know what you're doing? Do you know how to handle this? Do you want help? Model thinking through the task, the different variables. Hey, let's pull it up together and take a look at it. It might be things like, do you know your social security number yet? And things like that you might have to give to them. Give guidance if the student has no experience with the task, like financial aid forms or whatnot. And again, a lot of times that's stuff the parents do anyway. But it might also be good to have the student sit with you, even if you're doing it for the first time, just to show them what goes into it, just so that they're familiar with it. Model behaviors and then hand off to the student. Answer questions, shadow, be available, but encourage them to go through and do it themselves. Acknowledge the student feelings and insecurities and normalize that it's a learning process. Like something like the FAFSA, the financial aid form, you can say, hey, I'm doing this for the first time too. You're my first child, so I want you to see what goes into it, but you have to have an account too. And sometimes caregiver frustrations reflect their own uncertainty about a task on which their student needs help. Yikes, I've never done this before. Or it could be, oh, that school's only a train ride away, and the parent goes, I've never taken the train, what do you do? And there can be anxiety about that. A lot of times going through this, it's forcing us as parents to go through it for the first time too. So breaking down tasks into actionable steps that are the foundations of higher order outcomes. This is one of these principles with ADHD, again, that it's not a disorder of not knowing what to do. It's not doing what you know. It's not implementing the skills. So that's the Karate Kid, the wax on, wax off, how that taught him some of the basic moves of karate. Allow the student to handle the task and deal with the consequences. They may handle it differently than you would, and there can be multiple ways to solve a problem. Accountability, I've used that a few times. Praise and reward completion, even partial success, and effort involved in facing the task. Hey, I know I finished the FAFSA for you, but I appreciate you filling out what you did. Or, it's good that you did that, I appreciate that. The hard work of the caregiver is doing less, standing back a little more. With the qualification, this is apropos of what you were talking about, it's not going to be this total, okay, you're on your own now, you're out of the nest. It is the safety net. There are the concerns that, you know what, you're not going to be getting an off-campus apartment if you don't fill this out. You're going to be commuting from home or whatever, if that's realistic. Some other things the student can do just to get used to what needs to be done. Completing high school graduation forms or any administrative stuff there. Forms for college, the workplace, any local taxes they might have to do. If they have to apply for a passport, working with them to walk it through rather than what a lot of us parents do. Here, sign this. And we filled it out for them, and it's just all they have to do is sign it, then all of a sudden the passport shows up. I know they have to show up for the picture and all. Little things like scheduling an oil change for a car, making a health appointment, making an appointment to the dentist, scheduling a haircut, stuff that you might announce it to your student. Your haircut's on Friday at 3, don't forget, or here's the card, or here's the reminder. Have them just get used to well, what do I say? You do it. I feel weird. Well, it's role-playing for walking up to a professor and asking for help, or just the stuff that they might have to do on their own. And working with the students on the other side, I'll hear thoughts like, well, the oil change for the car, are they going to ask me what type of oil to put in? What do I have to know? And it sounds silly, and we can laugh about it now, but it's not like encoded in our genome. These are all the thoughts that could get in the way of doing it. And it's usually based on, I'm going to look silly. I'm going to look stupid. I should know this. And usually, once you've done it once, you've encountered 95% of everything you'll ever encounter. Do a load of laundry, cook a basic meal, invite stupid questions, or share your own things. Hey, I didn't know how to cook an egg until whatever time, or I thought the dryer was the washer, or whatever the case may be, just sort of normalizing this rite of passage in a way. Do food shopping, return an item to the store with a receipt, whatever the case may be. Little stuff that you go, here, you do this. It's sort of like when you sit with them and they're learning to drive. Okay, you get in the driver's seat. We're going to go drive around the vacant parking lot. Manage checking your savings account. Use public transportation. Hey, we're going to just take the train down to the city to visit the school just so you can get used to how it works, where everything's at. Any sort of scavenger hunt thing. Things that the student will have to do on their own, just giving them a little practice here and now. And it may not be exhaustive, but a lot of these things, once you do them once, you've encountered what you're going to, and just the very practice of interacting with other real free-range humans, real-world adults, is going to serve them well dealing with a boss, dealing with a professor. So preparing the students for the journey. So shifting gears here, and this is what it feels like to be an adult, like a dog holding its own leash as it's crossing the street. Again, the same role as the adult. Tolerate uncertainty and discomfort. And dealing with all the hassles of young adulthood, all the paperwork, all the things that the school contacts you about, or that the boss says, I need you here on time, I don't care that your parents didn't wake you up, whatever the case may be. And these new roles. And again, if you're an employee, if you're a student, you're a college student, you have all the responsibilities that go along with that. Facing the transitional inconsistencies, I can vote, but I still have a curfew, or the things that you know and all the things that you don't know or that you haven't experienced yet. So a lot of emerging adulthood is this assimilation and accommodation of new experiences, new roles, or the expansion and contraction. Sometimes people are really open to it. Okay, I want to go do this, give it a try, and other times they'll close down and say, you know what, I just can't do any more than I'm doing right now. Moving from the end of high school where you have it figured out, you're on top of the heap, to being a beginner at college, in the workplace, and elsewhere. Accepting guidance. Now, this is the other side of working with the caregivers about providing guidance and mentoring and coaching. A facet of independence is being able to accept advice, accept guidance, not knowing everything, listening, finding out what you don't know. So whereas the hard work of the caregivers is doing a little less, with that qualification of you're still going to be the safety net, the hard work of the student is doing more, but knowing that being a young adult doesn't mean you have to do it solo. You can ask for help. I don't know what they mean by this form. Do I check this or that? And that's where I would imagine most often the caregivers are more than happy to step in and say, yeah, let me help you get over the hump. And again, that's where that partial success can be reinforced. You're still a dependent adult, transitioning, graduated assumption of responsibilities, continued privileges, and like when I'm working with the young adults, it's there's two types of trust: that which is granted by others, we're going to trust you, or I'm going to trust you in a relationship. Then there's the trust that you earn by doing. You have to demonstrate your competence, demonstrate your maturity, and in dealing with especially the caregivers. Entering into negotiation, make your case, but understand there's a quid pro quo. You have to give a little to get a little. And this is your opportunity to demonstrate maturity, including accepting no. No, I'm not comfortable having you have an off-campus apartment during your freshman year. Well, let's talk about that later on. And realizing that, okay, I might have to, and what, when you're 18, a year is a long time away, but to say, all right, how many other students are living on campus, and it's not the worst thing in the world. The shift in attitude for students, the distortion of ruination. It's going to wreck the rest of my life if you don't let me have an off-campus apartment. And it's just their task is realizing that, well, don't always get everything you want, and it's not that bad, and not everybody else is getting this either, even though that wouldn't necessarily be an excuse. The shoulds, the rigid, unrealistic expectations or standards for yourself, or more often for others, often combined with the fairness fallacy. And it's one of the harder distortions. Like should statements most people get. Okay, I'm being overly hard on myself. If I didn't get an A+, I didn't do well on the exam. But the shoulds usually for others, well, they should let me do this because my friend did it, or because I asked for it, or because they should know that I need help, or they should give me the deposit for the apartment and not make me live at home and earn it. And then that's usually some of the oppositionality. Well, that's not fair, so therefore I'm well within my rights to not do this. I'm not going to take the recycling out anymore, whatever the case may be. Labeling and blaming. Again, externalizing blame. It's usually overgeneralizing to others. This isn't fair, the school's unreasonable, and all that. And it's just, that's part of the school of hard knocks, realizing the deadline's the deadline. With a qualification I'll talk about later. The fact that I've never done this does not equate to I cannot do this or I should not have to do this. And my parents have always taken care of this does not equal I should not have to do this. So again, it's said assuming the adult role. Again, the thought that I can't do this right now, I'll get to it later, does not mean I don't have to make a definitive plan, that I don't have to give my parents a time that I'm going to sit down with them and go over the form. Emotional reasoning is another one. I feel too stressed to do this right now, so everybody should understand and just let me be. That's part of that emotional management. In working with all adults with ADHD on procrastination, that's one of the big things. We call it the emotion. I'm sure it's not a real emotion, but we call it ugh. Ugh, I just don't feel like doing it. And even, I would imagine, but with young adults facing a lot of this stuff, again, there might be a lot more anxiety. It's not just, ugh, I don't feel like doing taxes. It's going to be more like the worry about this and actual stress about assuming these roles and just saying, I don't have experience doing this. Front-end perfectionism. I have to be in the right mood to do this. No, I'm not in the mood to do this. I have to be in the right frame of mind. Circumstances have to be just right. Again, it's another more fuel for procrastination, where I have to be perfectly calm in the right mood, and that's most likely not going to happen. And in fact, usually, and again, when I'm counseling the young adults with ADHD, it's, can we set aside 10 minutes? I'm stuck on the housing stuff. Go on the housing website, see what the form says, enter your name, come up with your passcode, whatever you need to do, and give it 10 minutes and make it real. You're going to feel uncomfortable, but let's just see what happens as you start filling in and you get as far as you can. And it's just like an exposure treatment for anxiety. Once you face it, it becomes real and it's a fairer fight. And also looking at the opportunity to, tell you what, everybody's going to have the first college class they walk into. They're going to be nervous, what's waiting for me? But once you're there, now you're putting that first class behind you. And every opportunity, every challenge is an opportunity to figure things out. And again, let others help you. Ask for help. And this is a truism for everybody, but we tend to underestimate the positive feeling associated with doing things and getting things done. So after the student fills out the housing paperwork, a job application, does the interview, whatever the case may be, they generally feel a lot better about it and getting it out of the way. But also the achievement of, all right, I faced that. And it's sort of how we build confidence. We don't get confidence first, we build it by doing and facing challenges. So elsewhere, how else do we help students do adulthood? I can't adult today, please don't make me adult. For some reason there's a dog theme, I didn't catch on this before. So what are some of the life skills for managing ADHD? But geared for this population. The daily planner. How do you manage, how do you know everything that you have to do? What do you have to do? What do you want to do? And that's very often an in for getting students to use some sort of planner system. It's that, tell you what, let's not even worry about your classes and your midterms or anything like that. What are some social things that you want to do? The football games you want to go to? Let's use that as a way of keeping track of things, and then let's start adding in, when's a good study time, before or after the football game you want to watch? And usually we can get some decent buy-in. There's one of the battles, I'll say briefly, between going digital versus paper and pencil. And our view is whatever works. If somebody's on their phone or on the computer, on the tablet, and they're using the schedule, it's what you will refer to most often and most easily. So as convenient as the phones are, by the time you take it out of your pocket and punch in the passcode and get to the calendar screen, a lot of people will say, I won't bother, I'll check it later. There's something about the paper pencil or paper pen planner and actually handwriting things in that just seems to work a little better. And I think there's actually talking about research, I think some research actually came out on that recently. For the individual, setting realistic expectations, breaking down tasks, not I'll write the 10-page paper in one sitting. When are little gaps in your schedule? When do you want to study? When do you not want to study? Do you not want to study during the day and study in the evening? That's fine, but it's what works. Or do you want to treat class like a job? Well, while I'm going to classes, if I have an hour in between, am I going back to my room where I may fall asleep and take a nap? Or do I want to go to the library knowing that that might free up the hour between 10 and 11 because I don't want to have to study then if I don't have to? And again, these are not usually quick shifts. A lot of times they're gradual as you get the buy-in, that the person goes, yeah, I really don't start studying till midnight, then I'm up till 3, and that's not working, so maybe I can start going to the library on some days or the big gaps I have in classes. Being mindful of the incautious optimism. This is this positive bias. It's like things will work out. I can pull an all-nighter. Somehow, some mystical way, things will break the right way, and not counting on that, and going more for not waiting till the last minute. Are there ways to get things done earlier? Even if you might spend 50% of the task the night before, that's better than 90% of the task the night before. And that usually comes from having semesters where they fall behind, they do have to rush at the end, take an incomplete, then usually there's a little more buy-in for trying to do things differently. Dealing with procrastination, that's for me, the main issue in ADHD, disengagement. And so with college and also the workplace, competing demands and opportunities, hey, the workplace, you generally don't have homework to do, so you have more free time on your own, you can go out and do things. Being able to say no to things. And let things pass to say, well, if your friends are getting together tonight and you have the midterm the next day, can you say no, knowing that there's going to be another get-together over the weekend or whatever? And FOMO, the fear of missing out. It's like one of those phrases, by now it's probably antiquated on campuses, but it's like one of those things, I don't want to let any opportunity go by. And then just keeping up with deadlines, administrative tasks, do not count on drawing on collateral. In high school, you might have the collateral of the teacher knows you're on the basketball team, the game went into overtime the night before, and it was an away game, so get the paper to me on Monday. Don't count on that necessarily in college, with the qualification, if for some reason you end up handing it in late, don't just assume that, okay, I guess I'm going to fail or whatever. Approach your professor. Talk it over with her or him. Let them know, I know I handed it in late, that's on me, but what will happen? Is it drop the letter grade, or if there were extenuating circumstances, or is there any way I can do any extra credit to make it up? Sometimes just showing up and taking responsibility and demonstrating a willingness to do something. At worst, it'll be, no, my policy is this and I stand by the policy. But a lot of times there is a little wiggle room. So you don't want to rely on it. It's easier to get it done by the deadline and hand it in and get the grade. But if you even miss a midterm, but again, this is where the students they'll withdraw out of shame, worry about, I'm going to fail, my parents are going to fall. And I've had students come to me the last week of the semester and say, Dr. Ramsay, I've been lying to you. I haven't made it to this class all semester. I missed the midterm and I haven't gone back. And I've been tracking classes with them, and they say, yeah, I'm doing okay in that class. And it turns out they were lying. And actually in Tom Brown's book, Smart But Stuck, one of his case examples is working with a student who did that too. And usually the first thing is, can you reach out to the professor? Reach out to your parents, let them know. And do you think your parents will be upset? Well, sure, but they're concerned, and what's worse, thinking about them being upset or dealing with it and then coming up with a plan for what's next. And work with your professor. And I would say almost invariably, the professors have all been reasonable. It may not be, okay, get it, I can let you retake the midterm. It might be, well, you're going to have to drop the class, but you can retake it again. It won't be a failure or something like that. There's usually, just by showing up and saying something, you rule the narrative in a way. The professor might say, okay, the person flaked out or they stopped coming or whatever. If you go in and say, hey, I'm embarrassed and I'm working on this, but it's on me, but what are my options? Usually you take responsibility for it and they'll work with you. But that goes to initiating contact. But watching out for pseudo follow-through. Okay, I'm going to send an email at midnight where I know the professor's not in the office and most likely not going to, or I'm going to call and leave a message on voicemail when I know they're teaching a class. I followed up, but it's like a pseudo follow-up. It's just more like, okay, I want to say I did it, but not really have to deal with it. So, Seinfeld had a whole thing where he said, do you ever call somebody on the phone and you're almost surprised you get them on the phone, you're expecting, you almost want the voicemail? Another thing, accepting and responding to corrective feedback. And you know what? It's just easier to follow rules and guidelines. And this isn't meant to say, yes, we want to create a nation of automatons, but it's just, you know what, there are some, do you really want to fight against this deadline if it's not going to be a winning battle? There might be other things where there's more negotiation, but choosing battles, self-advocacy, asking for help. Again, asking for help is part of independent functioning. Just basic living skills, the stuff our grandmothers would tell us to do, and especially for college students, the whole sleep-wake cycle. I mean, just even free-range college students, the sleep-wake cycles typically get knocked off balance. But that whole thing about just getting enough rest, and it starts with when you wake up the previous day. You're getting ready for bed when you wake up. So meaning, are you waking up at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, or are you getting up and going to your first class? And that's another thing I know in treatment, we really emphasize, if you get feet on the ground first thing, get it to that first class and get plugged into the rhythm of the day, even if you don't pay attention that first class, you'll be better off. The once I get started thing. Hygiene, eating, exercise, health routine. Relationship with the technology, a good servant but a poor master. Like I mentioned before, having the good relationship, we call it turning on the device with a plan. If you're sitting down to study, it just might be one of these things, you have a script for how do I get to the document I want to work on, and how can I use any game or something else I like to do as a reward for what I'm setting out to do. Sexual health, driving is another huge issue. Especially if somebody has ADHD and they're not on medications, we just know the driving risks are a lot higher. And then just the concerns about substance use on campus, but also for people, in the workplace, because there's just a lot more free time. So again, with the implementation skills, we know those things, but ADHD is a performance problem. Be specific. Because a lot of times there are many problems entangled together. So how can we pull apart? What is the main thing? Okay, I'm not waking up for my first class. Select one issue and define it in specific behavioral terms. What do I have to do? How would I program a robot to do this? I have to put the alarm across the room. I have to, have my medications by the bed. I'm going to have a little coping card next to my alarm clock that says feet on the ground. If I can just get into the seated position on my bed with my feet touching the ground, I will get up. Make it like really behavioral. And it sounds silly, but it actually works. There's actually a whole literature on it with kids. What is the smallest behavioral step you can take to engage in a task? Shifting from off task to on task. And sometimes it is even just having, when I walk out of my first class, I'm going to turn left towards the library rather than right towards my dorm room. So that I can go to the library the hour between classes. That'll decrease the likelihood I'll go home and take a nap. These are not immutable laws of physics, but set up, it increases the likelihood that it becomes a cue. It becomes part of a script that you don't have to worry about studying. You're just worried about turning left, and then that starts the launch sequence for getting to the library. So it follows through. There's a whole research on implementation strategies. If I can do X, if I can turn left out of the class, then I can go to sit in the library for an hour and study. Dealing with negative predictions about a task, or this is the cognitive piece of cognitive therapy, or some of those cognitive distortions I mentioned before. Another way to think about it is the negative thoughts are like a prosecuting attorney making a case against, say, going to the library, going to class. Your Honor, here's why Jimmy shouldn't have to go to class. He's tired, he was up late last night. He'll stay home from class and he'll study for that class, and that'll make up for it. And just as an exercising, well, what would a defense attorney say about that argument? Well, Your Honor, Jimmy's probably not going to study for that class because he is tired, but he's not so tired that he can't walk to class. And if he can just not even get in the shower, just throw on shorts and a t-shirt and get to class and sit there. That's all he has to do, and it'll be much better, and you won't have to make up the class and blah, blah, blah. Handling the UG I talked about. Be mindful of escape behaviors, what one of our patients calls procrastivity. Oh, you know what? I've got to work on this paper. Right now is the right time to figure out what classes I want to take next semester. It may be something important, but it's actually an escape from what the more immediate behavior. And again, that engagement, once I get started, the smallest behavioral step. And we can do this with studying, writing papers. There's ways to turn it behavioral. as we start wrapping up, so those are like some of the nitty gritty, but there are the larger questions about what exactly is next for this student. Is it post-secondary education, which can also include vocational training, community college? Looking at colleges, what's the right size? Is a small liberal arts college with like an 8-to-1 student-teacher ratio better? Or sometimes I've heard students say, you know what, I like the larger college because it had more services, more class offerings, things like that. If there was like one section of this history class that was very paper loaded, there's another one that was more in-class exam, so you can sort of avoid certain types of things. And that's where it takes a lot of research and maybe working with like advisors at the school or whatnot. Is the student going to work or work on an internship to gain experience working in a job? Will there be a gap year? And there are a lot more gap year programs right now. The gap year, I don't think should be, okay, I just got a year off to hang out. It might be working or getting some experience where you don't have to figure everything out, but it's just sort of getting used or taking a class or two in an area that you might be interested in. The military is another option. I'm sure there are various other things that can be done other than automatically going right to school. And some of it is the variables. Do I have to work to save money for school? The truth is some 17 or 18-year-olds are already parents, and there might be something that they have a child that they have to care for, a consideration there. Their readiness for school, they might just need another year, just like kindergarten gets delayed sometimes. Any physical or emotional health issues too that might obviate an immediate start for either work or school. And figuring out by doing, gathering experiences, and even if you spend a lot of time finding out what you don't want to do or don't like, that's a useful year. And whatever you choose, making a good fit. Or what is the good fit, like with the student's temperament or needs? Would they like a bigger school, and like we said, or do they want this smaller school with a good learning support program? And this is also for the workplace too. What are the interests and skills and aptitudes that might represent a good fit for the student in terms of work? And a setting, indoor, outdoor, going to the same office every day, working multiple offices, being on the road, any support services, and this could be out of school or in the community for somebody in the workplace. What are the work hours? And just even looking at the whole trajectory, not getting locked into the 4-year college or do I want to do this job for the rest of my life? It's, we're taking it year by year and figuring things out. And, with work, career counseling, which it always seemed like a tough field just because you might, my best career option might have been to be a state senator or something like that, but there's not a lot of them. So it might be, that's a good fit, but there's a lot of steps that you have to go through. But I think it can help winnow down options. Co-op programs, internships, volunteer work, apprenticeship, there's a lot of different ways to get into a work field. Making use of the college disability services. Very often there will be a learning support center on campus that you can use regardless. You don't even need any sort of special diagnosis. In terms of actual accommodations, there are specific evaluation criteria that must be met for the formal Americans with Disabilities Act accommodations. Professional treatment or support services for ADHD in college or in the workplace. Things that will help you navigate through the next challenge. There's also the ongoing renegotiation of the parent-child relationship at home. As they're going through, doing well, not doing so well, somewhere in the middle. And what trust has the student earned, and what is still being formulated right now. Again, parents can still provide the ultimate safety net for big falls, but increasingly letting the student handle the stumbles, if you will. And again, the what's next decision, it's important, but goals can be revised along the way. Or sometimes, and I like this reframe with a lot of students, you start a job, and that might be the exact right job for you at that time, but 2 years later, it might not be anymore. Just like 5th grade, you might have a great 5th grade year, but at the end of the year, it doesn't mean you want to do 5th grade again. It's like, well, that worked for what it was meant to do, and now that I'm ready for the next thing. I've done 5th grade, now I'm ready for something else. And the same thing with school or whatnot. So a lot of these I've covered already. But looking for establishing treatment and support connections, especially on campus, better to do it sooner rather than later. Find out how campus clinics handle ADHD medications and treatment and the campus counseling services. Look for the educational support. Is there a learning center? What's the advising like? Do they have people at the learning center and the counseling service familiar with ADHD? Are there people in the community? If you're in work or you need specialists outside campus, who's available in the community? And even down to the nitty-gritty of, all right, where's the pharmacy where you're going to get your medications? And treatment issues in the real world, having time off or getting approval to, leave an hour early for sessions, Family Medical Leave Act, if you need to do that. For some jobs might have drug testing. You might need a therapeutic use exemption for your prescribed Adderall or whatever the case may be. And just ironing out insurance coverage, flexible spending plans, open enrollment periods. Again, the nitty-gritty that might have been taken care of before. And some of these things I still find befuddling. Is this covered or not? Or it's who's in network? I think at one point, I think with my insurance coverage, I would be out of network for myself if I gave myself therapy, which is like an existential crisis. But I always go back to this one, the Mark Twain quote, when I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. So it's that one of the things, the patience with it, that, as difficult as the journey may be, and sometimes it can be quite difficult. And sometimes, college is a 6, 7, even more year, and going for a couple years, accumulating credits, and then getting more somewhere else. But, guiding through, being present, and there's a lot of things, hopefully I've outlined today that can be done within the household, but also, getting help and getting support outside that. So that way, and sometimes it's a weird thing, I would imagine very often in the counseling sessions, and I've had patients say this, yeah, these are things similar to what my parents would tell me, but it's just different. It's just a different, relationship in there where it's sort of like, hey, it's your choice whether you get up or not, but, how do you compare a day when you get up and get to your first class versus when you don't? And it's just sort of like inviting them to do it. So I think that covered all my miscellaneous thoughts. And I don't know if there's any other questions, though, or observations that you'd want to share at this point. The question was about trying to work with young adults and probably students of all ages about using actually a daily planner, and probably like a paper pencil one that lays flat on the desk or you can carry around. The benefits of that over the digital. Part of the planner, and this is the pitch I make, is it helps you see time. So on the screen you're only seeing a truncated half day, which is better than nothing. But it takes effort to scroll through to say, all right, what does tomorrow hold, or this weekend? We want to see at least a week at a glance. So that's the benefit of the planner. You can see, where am I starting today? Where am I ending? Okay, if do I have an early start or a late start tomorrow? It helps you pace yourself across the week and find gaps and fill in gaps and make plans. So, I think ultimately it takes some tough buy-in because it's a thing, and it's maybe not cool. But usually once somebody, and working with them to be creative, okay, do you want to get a binder and make your own planner? That's something that's more manageable for you. That's fine. But I think the actual having something where you can see more time at a stretch, and even looking at a month at a glance, it's something like at the end of, like we had one of those months where, or we'll have one coming up where May into June, like June 1st is like a Wednesday, I think. So all of a sudden, something that's maybe that last full week in May, you say, well, this other thing doesn't happen until like June 3rd. That feels like it's 2 or 3 weeks away. And you look on like an actual calendar, you go, no, it's only like 4 inches away. You know, it's over there. It's coming up. It's next Wednesday or something. And that's just a different view of it. The other thing tied in with it is wearing a visible timepiece to track time. And, you know, I still say, you know, because again, it's just an approximation of time. And even like an analog clock versus a digital one, because something that says, well, 1:59, 2 o'clock class, I'm not late. But, you know, the hour hand or the minute hand, it's like, hey, I'm only an eighth of an inch away from being late. Probably the best analog for tracking time would be an hourglass. You know, sand running out. And to see, oh, it's almost out, I'm almost out of time. So, but that's what we want. It's sort of these, you know, so going back, it's a very long-winded yes. I think actually having something that you can see a longer stretch of time, at least a week, so you just get more of an orientation of where am I at in the week. And some of it's good. Hey, 2 more days till the weekend, then I have a break and I can spend, you know what, I don't have to worry about the paper tonight, but I'll work on it Saturday morning. But then you have to follow through with the plan. That's the other piece. But that goes down to, let's make it realistic. You're not going to work on it all day Saturday, but could go to the library between 10 and noon, and then by lunchtime you still have the whole rest of your day. And even that, it would be, okay, when you get to the library, rather than texting friends, how will you get started? What's that behavioral script how do you get engaged going from not writing to writing? Computer options where you can see the whole month. So that sounds like it's the main takeaway point. It's being able to see an adequate stretch of time. And yeah, I'm a big believer in whatever works. If the person will do the phone and they'll scan and say, let me scan all the way to the bottom of the day so I don't miss something, it's, you know, the proof is in the outcome.